Thank you so much for tuning in. I want to break down CBDCs for you folks, because this is coming at us like a freight train. Most Americans have not even heard about this yet, and yet all of our freedoms, all of our privacy, everything we hold dear is on the line. So I've got a PowerPoint presentation. I want to bring the receipts here so you can see what's going on, but stay tuned, folks. Hang on to your seats and make sure to share this out. Critically important. Before we get into that, some of you may have heard of the Great Reset. If not, I'll let the guy who is at least the figurehead, the front man for the Great Reset, kind of give you an overview here.
But we have another choice. We can build a new social contract, particularly integrating the next generation. We can change our behavior to be in harmony with nature again. And we can make sure that the technologies of the fourth industrial revolution are best utilized to provide us with better lives. In short, we need a great reset.
Yes, we need a great reset, says Mr. Klaus Schwab. Now, I mean, don't get the wrong idea. Klaus Schwab is not the mastermind of this. In fact, he's a frontman. He was recruited by Henry Kissinger, who was recruited by David Rockefeller, who was recruited by Satan. And so you see the kind of the chain of command there. This guy is just a lowly operative in this, but at least he's posing as the front man. Now, when they announced the Great Reset, that was the summer of 2020. It wasn't just the head of the World Economic Forum. They had many others there as well. Here was the head of the UN joining in at this 2020 summer Davos event where they announced the Great Reset. Listen to what he had to say.
The Great Reset is a welcome recognition that this human tragedy must be a wake-up call. As you rightly say, it is imperative that we reimagine, rebuild, redesign, reinvigorate, and rebalance our world.
It is imperative, right? This is not an optional thing, folks. We must have a Great Reset. So they're going to bring this in using what they're calling the poly crisis. So they're orchestrating health crisis, environmental crisis, financial crisis, economic crisis, dollar crisis, monetary crisis, geopolitical crisis, war crisis, political crisis, you name it. And that is their strategy. And actually, when they announced the Great Reset, they brought in also the head of the International Monetary Fund, which, as we'll see, is a critical player in all of this, to announce how important crises were to bringing this all about. Check it out.
History would look at this crisis as the great opportunity for reset.
Oh, yes, the great opportunity for reset, says the Bulgarian communist.
Secondly, we know the digital economy is the big winner of this crisis.
Oh, the digital economy is the big winner of this crisis. Now, don't get the idea that just because they announced all this during COVID, that this is a new plan. We'll let Bill Clinton introduce our next guest.
And then, as a student at Georgetown, I heard that call clarified by a professor named Carroll Quigley.
Yeah, so Carroll Quigley is an important guy who's a mentor to Bill Clinton. I've got his book right behind me here. I don't know if you can see it there, but it's called Tragedy and Hope, one of his books. And he actually brags that he was very close to these insiders, the establishment, the deep state, whatever you want to call it, for a period of decades. He says they even let him examine their secret papers for a couple of years. And he said, he actually agrees with most of their ideas and their agenda. He just thinks they ought to be known instead of secret. And one of the things he says when he kind of summarizes what they're up to, he says these powers of financial capitalism had a far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. Now, he said the system would be controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world, through secret meetings and conferences. He says the apex of the system was going to be the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, a private bank owned and controlled by the world's central banks, for themselves, private corporations. So a lot to break down here, folks, but in a feudalist system, you own nothing, right? Which is exactly what the World Economic Forum told us to expect by 2030. You will own nothing and you'll be happy, but you'll have to rent everything, which is feudalism defined, right? You own no property. You just depend on your overlords and their good graces to be able to farm, to be able to feed your family, etc. Now, you can occupy a little piece of land and farm on it as long as you hand over your crops when your baron or your lord or your noble demands it, and as long as you hand over your sons and daughters when they are demanded of you. But obviously, this is going to be a more technocratic and technologically advanced feudalist system. But as we'll see, the Bank for International Settlements really is right at the apex of this system. So let's dig into it. Now, when they came out with these stimulus bills to help us after they destroyed the economy, shut down our businesses, and all the rest of it, Democrats twice tried to sneak these digital dollars and digital wallets into the stimulus bill. Now, the stimulus bill was a giant fraud, folks. They stole about $70,000 per American household. Most of that was handed out to the government schools, to the big corporations, to the mega banks. And then they gave you $1,200. That was the cheese in the mousetrap, so that you would say, oh, please pass this. We want $1,200 of our own dollars returned to us. Well, the Democrats wanted to return it to you as a digital dollar. It was defined in the bill as a balance expressed as a dollar value consisting of a digital ledger entry recorded as liabilities on the accounts of any Federal Reserve Bank. Ooh. And yeah, so that's where they're going with this, folks. They've been working on it for years now. Here's October. They set out digital currency principles, right? About 100 miles from where I'm sitting right now in the Bahamas, they already unveiled the first central bank digital currency. It's called the sand dollar, and that is already now in circulation. Coming soon, Jamaica is going to have one as well. Here's the Prime Minister of Jamaica telling folks, oh, don't be scared. It's going to be fun. Watch.
In the coming weeks I'll be making certain announcements regarding the acceleration of Jamaica's intention to become a fully digital society. We are well on our way to this. We have established the national identification system. We have put in place our digital currency. We have given directions to our ministries to digitalize their operations. Most of our ministries are now moving from paper-based systems to digital systems. Our military is transitioning. The society is moving very quickly, very rapidly to become digital. Our banking consumers are seeing it as well because the banks are moving very rapidly to digital. You have something now called artificial intelligence. Very soon, this position of a human being exchanging cash and so on, that is going to disappear from the banking system very soon. And you are going to have to interface with machines. I don't want it to be a scary thought, but it is a thought that we all have to embrace.
All right, we all have to embrace, right? Don't let it be scary. You're just going to lose all transparency, all privacy, etc. So the Ukraine deputy prime minister is excited to take his salary in CBDCs. Russia is launching its own CBDC, the digital ruble. About 8 years ago, the Canadians announced that they were going to move in this direction. Again, it had nothing to do with COVID, right? Nobody had ever heard of a COVID. And I wrote an article about it for the New American. Listen to this.
Introducing Mint Chip from the Royal Canadian Mint, the evolution of currency. Money, as we know it, is fine for today, but tomorrow is a different story. Imagine a whole new breed of transactions that are smaller, faster, and virtually everywhere. That's where Mint Chip comes in. Mint Chip is currency in a digital form. Using a chip, you securely load value onto a smartphone, USB device, computer, tablet, or cloud. Maybe even some future device that doesn't even exist yet. Now you're ready to go. It's so easy that even a child can use it, especially for their allowance. Mint Chip is better than cash since you can use it online.
Better than cash. Even a child could use it. What's not to like, right? So Joe Biden in March of 2022 signed this. He says, my administration places the highest urgency on research and development efforts into designing and deploying a U.S. central bank digital currency. It's right on the White House. European Union is finalizing its digital wallets and digital euros. And of course, the Bank for International Settlements is right at the center of all of this. In fact, their innovation hub has this strategic partnership with the Federal Reserve and the central banks of the world to push these central bank digital currencies. Now, according to the BIS, and they're coordinating this process, 93% of the central banks in the world are now working on these CBDCs at various different parts. Obviously, Communist China is the leader. We'll come back to that. But they say that Bank for International Settlements said that central banks should work to achieve interoperability between their CBDCs. And of course, they're doing that through the BIS, or creating common standards and then international payment infrastructure. Again, they're doing this all over, folks. So in public, they want you to think it's just better than cash. It's just kind of the same thing as cash, only more convenient and all the rest of it. Well, when they think you're not paying attention, here's Agustin Cartenze. He's the general manager of the Bank for International Settlements. Listen clearly what he says about these CBDCs and how they're so different.
Our analysis on CBDC, in particular for the use of general to the general use, we tend to establish the equivalence with cash. And there is a huge difference there. For example, in cash, we don't know, for example, who's using a $100 bill today. We don't know who is using a 1,000 peso bill today. A key difference with the CBDC is that central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability. And also we will have the technology to enforce that. Those two issues are extremely important, and that makes a huge difference with respect to what cash is.
I hope you caught that, right? No more privacy. You will not be able to buy or sell anymore without being tracked, without having to get permission from the government and the banks. And also, he says we will have absolute control over how that currency is spent. Now, building on that is this guy here, Ivy League Ivory Tower Wonk, speaking at the summer Davos at the World Economic Forum in China just this summer. Listen to what he says.
If you think about the benefits of digital money, there are huge potential gains. It's not just about digital forms of physical currency. You can have programmability, units of central bank currency with expiry dates. You could have, as I argue in my book, a potentially better and some people might see it, or a darker world where the government decides that units of central bank money can be used to purchase some things, but not other things that it deems less desirable, like, say, ammunition or drugs or pornography or something of the sort. And that is very powerful in terms of the use of a CBDC.
Yeah, I'll say very powerful, right? They're talking about programmable currency. And of course, all this, as we'll see, is going to be tied to your personal data, your social credit score, like the Chi-Coms do, to figure out whether you should be allowed to buy ammunition, whether you should be allowed to get on an airplane, whether you should be allowed to have a good job, whether you should be allowed to buy more steaks or buy gasoline for your car. And you think I'm kidding, and yet they're openly talking about this, right? They want this digital currency to help keep track of your carbon footprint. And once you exceed your carbon budget, you cannot buy any more stuff that emits CO2. Listen.
But very, very specific. This specific brand, even the specific batch of this, if we link that with, AI technology and then big data and particularly Internet of Things, there are ways for us to come up with instant measurement and reporting of the carbon footprint. I hope that through this we can help people to really make different choices.
Yeah, we're going to help people make different choices, which is a nice way of saying, hey, that's a nice shop you've got there. It'd be a shame if something were to happen to it. And of course, they're very open about this. Here's another clown at the World Economic Forum.
We're developing, through technology, an ability for consumers to measure their own carbon footprint. What does that mean? That's, where are they traveling? How are they traveling? What are they eating? What are they consuming on the platform? So, individual carbon footprint tracker.
Well, coming soon to a theater near you, folks. And this isn't some hypothetical off in the future. Credit card companies are already starting to track this stuff, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. The European Central Bank says that these central bank digital currencies have to allow the governments and the central banks to track all money. The Biden White House, in a policy objectives document about CBDCs, says they should be efficient, flexible, secure. They need to facilitate transactions with the global financial system. And here's the kicker. They need to advance racial equity and environmental priorities, right? In other words, these are for social engineering, folks. These are not money in the traditional sense that we have always understood. These are to engineer outcomes in society that they want. And all this, of course, underpins the New World Order that these globalists are always talking about. Here's Pippa Malmgren at the World Government Summit just last year talking about how critical this will be.
What underpins a world order is always the financial system. I was very privileged. My father was an advisor to Nixon when they came off the gold standard in '71, and so I was brought up with a kind of inside view of how very important the financial structure is to absolutely everything else. And what we're seeing in the world today, I think, is we are on the brink of a dramatic change where we are about to, and I'll say this boldly, we're about to abandon the traditional system of money and accounting and introduce a new one. And the new one, the new accounting, is what we call blockchain. it means digital, it means having a almost perfect record of every single transaction that happens in the economy, which will give us far greater clarity over what's going on.
In other words, no more
The
privacy.
money will be sovereign in nature. Most people think that digital money is crypto and private, but what I see are superpowers introducing digital currency. The Chinese were the first. The US is on the brink, I think, of moving in the same direction. The Europeans have committed to that as well.
Yes, and as we'll see, this is going global soon. But the Financial Times, one of the leading mouthpieces for the establishment, had this to say in a recent article, this was published a few months ago, about CBDCs. They said what CBDC research and experimentation appears to be showing is that it will be nigh on impossible to issue such currencies outside of a comprehensive national digital ID management system, meaning CBDCs will likely be tied to personal accounts that include personal data, credit history, and other forms of relevant information. Folks, they're telling you what they're going to do here. Your CBDCs are going to be connected to your digital ID. Your digital ID is going to have lots of your personal information on it, your data, your credit history, and by other forms of relevant information. They're talking about here, folks, a central bank digital currency tied to a social credit score, just like in China, where if you ask too many questions about the government on social media, if you have friends who maybe ask too many questions about the government on social media, you're going to be penalized and your privileges will be taken away or granted based on these scores. Now, the New York Federal Reserve Bank, the most powerful of the regional feds, has already partnered with the mega banks to launch these digital dollars. And folks, before we get into the national ID that's critical to this, I want you to realize what they mean with all this personal data, right? They fully intend to destroy you if you step outside the bounds of what they consider acceptable. They're already doing this. That's how I know that, right? JP Morgan, just a few months ago, canceled Dr. Mercola's healthcare business. Not only did they cancel him and his associates, they even canceled his family members, okay? Over in Canada, once a free nation, they actually froze the bank accounts of truckers who were protesting against the vaccine mandates and the lockdowns. Imagine that. And they do this to us when we can still take our money out of the banks. What will they do once we have no more option? All right, so the way they're bringing this in, they're now going to all of our states. They have something called the Uniform Commercial Code, where every state is expected to kind of adopt these uniform laws on commerce and business. Well, the Uniform Law Commission, which tells states what to do on this front, is not officially a government body, but it kind of acts like one. They're now telling state governments, state legislatures across the country to redefine money, to add in there including a monetary unit of account established by an intergovernmental organization or by agreement between two or more countries. They're paving the way for CBDCs. Now, when they first unveil CBDCs, what you'll see is cash will circulate in tandem, in parallel with CBDCs. But as we move on, they're going to get rid of cash. How do I know? They've been telling us for a decade or more. Okay, I wrote about this over a decade ago when the Ford Foundation and the UN announced that they were creating the Better Than Cash Alliance. This is their website. It says it's a global partnership committed to moving from cash to digital payments. Supposedly that's going to reduce poverty. What a bunch of baloney. When they announced it, they said their partnership is with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Citibank, USAID, right, the U.S. government, the UN Capital Development Fund, which is where the secretariat of this organization is, and also Visa. They've now added many others. Here's some of the partners. You've got mass murdering communist dictatorships, Bill and Melinda Gates of Hell Foundation, MasterCard, the Clintons. If you can't trust the Clintons, who can you trust, right? All kinds of different U.S. and UN agencies, lots of murderous dictatorships, Islamic dictatorships, communist dictatorships. And of course, COVID provided the perfect pretext to start waging open war on cash. Listen.
This morning, cash in the age of COVID-19. The pandemic appears to be accelerating the rise of digital currency. Here in the U.S., mobile payments have spiked dramatically since the outbreak. In the U.K., the BBC reports ATM withdrawals are down 60%. China's central bank has reportedly been disinfecting banknotes, while many businesses around the world are asking customers not to use cash at all. It's all making some wonder if the digital dollar is the new king of currency.
Oh, the digital dollar will be the king of currency, says CBS Fake News. Now, this exact same messaging was broadcast to people all over the world, folks. Here you have Euro News.
As more and more businesses begin to open their doors across the UK, shopkeepers are increasingly looking for ways to ensure the chances of COVID-19 spreading are kept to a minimum. One measure being widely employed is banning the use of cash, instead asking customers to reach for their debit or credit card. Like many businesses across London.
Anyway, it goes on. We'll go quick through these. Here is Australia.
His collection of coins has dwindled as cash is no longer king. It's only used for a quarter of all transactions in Australia. The rest are mainly through debit or credit cards, digital wallets, and smartwatches. A lot of people are predicting that Australia will become a cashless society within years.
Oh, yeah, fun, right?
Cash.
Here's the
When was
UK.
the last time
Here's Indian television, right? If you know anything about India, all you got to do is tell them that the Europeans are doing it. Oh, how sophisticated, how modern. We want to do that too. So here you go.
On this broadcast is Beyond's Lucy Hugh, who joins us live from Brussels. Lucy, is Germany going cashless?
Yes, so that appears to be the case, and certainly that's being mirrored in a number of European countries that, you know, using cards for all transactions does reduce the risk. We know that the virus has the potential to spread on things like banknotes. Particularly here in Brussels, we're starting to notice that a number of businesses, as well as implementing things like plexiglass screens and hand sanitizer on counters, they're also encouraging customers to pay with card as much as possible, and also to use contactless payments.
So now the EU has already introduced massive limits on cash. You can no longer anywhere in the EU buy anything for more than 7,000 euros in cash. A lot of the biggest governments in the EU, like France and Italy, now you cannot buy anything for over 1,000 euros in cash, right? You can't even buy a nice suit or anything like that. Truly amazing. Now, they're saying here pretty openly that with cash out of the way, we've got everyone dependent on digital currencies to buy and sell. They can also do negative interest rates where they can actually shut you down if you, they can start taxing your money, right? If you leave it in the bank. Right now, you can pull it out and put it in cash. If this continues, they'll be able to put negative interest rates in, so you cannot take your money out, and they'll just basically slowly steal your money. At the same time, they're globalizing this now. At the IMF spring meetings, they launched with the Digital Currency Monetary Authority an international CBDC. Here's the IMF chief talking about this.
To have transactions more efficient and fairer, we need systems that connect countries. In other words, we need interoperability. And for this reason, at the IMF, we are working hard on the concept of a global CBDC platform.
All right, a global CBD platform, folks. Now, for decades, they've been calling for this world currency. Here's The Economist in 1988 predicting we'd have it. Here's one of the leaders of Russia.
And the question of supranational currency. Incidentally, I can probably have good news to you. In my pocket, there is a supranational coin, which was a gift given to me. And this is one unit of testing, probing unity and diversity it's referred to, and it's referred to as international currency, United Future World Currency. Here it is.
All right, United Future World Currency. Now, in 2009, the head of the People's Bank of China's Chinese central bank put out a report saying that we need to reform the international monetary system. He says the desirable goal is to create an international reserve currency disconnected from nations, and that is exactly what they're working on. Now, they asked Timothy TurboTax Geithner, this was Obama's Treasury Secretary, what he thought of this proposal. Listen.
On the first question, I haven't read the governor's proposal. He's a very thoughtful, very careful, distinguished central banker. Generally find him sensible on every issue. But as I understand this proposal, it's a proposal designed to increase the use of the IMF's special drawing rights. And we're actually quite open to that suggestion.
Wow, quite open to that, folks. If you don't know the IMF special drawing rights, think of it like the proto-global currency. They do the same thing as the Federal Reserve does, basically. They create this currency, the SDR, out of nothing, and they basically steal your savings every time they do it, and they're pretty proud of what they're doing. Check this out.
Countries are requesting our help, and we are working closely with the other international financial institutions to provide a strong, coordinated response for largest possible impact. We are replenishing the Catastrophe Containment and Relief Trust to help the poorest countries. We welcome those who have already made pledges and call on others to join. And we stand ready to deploy all our $1 trillion lending capacity. But we are not stopping there. We are looking at other available options. Several low and middle income countries have asked the IMF to make a SDR allocation, as we did during the global financial crisis, and we are exploring this option with our membership.
Yeah, so that means we're going to print, and they ended up doing that, by the way.
Help.
They ended up creating $600 billion worth of these SDRs. Now, if you're not familiar with the SDRs, again, it's kind of like a global fiat currency. This is an out-of-date video that the IMF produced. The numbers are totally out of date now, but just the concept is still the same. Check it out.
The SDR was created by the IMF in 1969. Currently, the amount of SDRs stands at just over $204 billion. Its value is based on a basket of 4 key international currencies: the US dollar, Japanese yen, British pound, and the euro. There are no notes or coins denominated in SDRs, but the SDR does play a role as an interest-bearing international reserve asset. The IMF allocates SDRs to its members in proportion to their standing in the organization, which is largely based on their share of the global economy. The allocation of SDRs boosts member countries' official reserves. While SDRs cannot be used to purchase goods and services directly, countries can exchange them amongst themselves. Once the SDRs have been added to a member country's official reserves, a country can exchange its SDRs for hard currencies such as the US dollar, euro, yen, or pound through voluntary trading arrangements with other IMF member countries.
In other words, they'll create these SDRs out of nothing. They'll hand them to like the mullahs in Iran. Then the Iranians will turn it into dollars. Then they'll buy things that Americans actually have to work to produce. That's how it works, folks. Now, the Rockefeller Foundation, they put out this incredible report in 2010, 10 years before anybody ever heard of a COVID. And they imagined this hypothetical future pandemic where, for the first time in human history, we'd have to quarantine well people. And they said one of the things we needed to do was a biometric ID for all citizens. Interesting. They also proposed mandatory face diapers for everyone and much more. And they said after the pandemic faded, the authoritarian control and oversight of citizens and their activities stuck and even intensified. Folks, this is what they are doing. Now, let's talk about the ID. So back in about 10 years ago, ID 2020 was born. They said on their website it's building a new global model for the design, funding, and implementation of digital ID solutions and technologies. They said they would track all kinds of information, your health, etc., from birth to death. And of course, the partners, we've got the Rockefeller Foundation, and Microsoft, Bill Gates of hell. These are the founding partners, right? And so now we see the World Economic Forum is pushing this idea of digital IDs. We see multiple American states, including conservative and Republican states, pushing this idea. You got Utah, Mississippi, Maryland, California is now issuing digital driver's licenses. And this all merges into the vaccine passport agenda. So digital ID, digital health certificate, digital passport, it all goes together. It's being run by the World Health Organization now, and they actually agreed to it at the last G20 meeting in November of 2022. Check this out.
So let's have a digital health certificate acknowledged by WHO if you have been vaccinated or tested properly, then you can move around. So for the next pandemic, instead of stopping the movement of the people 100%, which clock the economy globally, you can still provide some movement of the people. Indonesia has achieved, G20 country has agreed to have this digital certificate using WHO standard, and we will submit into the next World Health Assembly in Geneva as the revision to.
And that now has been done, folks. And again, they were plotting this long before anybody ever heard of COVID. In 2018, the U.S. government funded a study to see about using vaccine passports to improve vaccine coverage. May of 2019, the EU proposed that by 2022, everybody in Europe should have a common vaccine passport. So now in Sweden, and I just got back from Sweden a couple months ago, came from the future, and I can tell you, you don't want to go there. There are now thousands of lemmings running around, little sheeples with microchips in their hand for their vaccine passports and their money. CBDCs and vaccine passports all rolled into one in your hand. Check it out.
Implants are a very versatile technology that can be used for many different things. And right now, it's very convenient to have a COVID passport always accessible on your implant.
Oh, wow, that's convenient, all right. Now they're marketing this garbage to Americans.
When Elias Brotberger goes to work, he doesn't need ID, and he doesn't need money. In fact, much of what he needs to get through the day is hidden right there, just below the surface, in his hand.
Like to touch it?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Oh, weird. Yeah, it's like a grain of rice.
Yeah, a grain of rice.
Embedded in his hand is a microchip that serves as his keys, his ID, and his wallet.
All right, folks. So your keys, your ID, your vaccine passport, all in one. Now, Bill Gates of Hell and Microsoft in 2020, they patented a cryptocurrency system using body activity data. Basically, if you're a good slave and you jump through your hoops, you get your cryptos. If you don't, well, sorry, slave, you can't have any money. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, actually proposed microchipping all children to keep them safe from COVID. And ultimately, they have even grander plans. I want to show you Yuval Noah Harari. He's a leading advisor to Klaus Schwab. He's a leading stenographer for the transhumanist movement. And here's where he says this is going.
Maybe in a couple of decades, when people look back, the thing they will remember from the COVID crisis is this is the moment when everything went digital. And if this was the moment when everything became monitored, that we agreed to be surveyed all the time, not just in authoritarian regimes, but even in democracies. And maybe most importantly at all, this was the moment when surveillance started going under the skin.
Oh, and so Klaus Schwab, you heard him at the beginning when he talked about the Great Reset, talking about the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which is a big part of that. And listen to how he defines it in one sentence.
It's at the end, what the Fourth Industrial Revolution will lead to is a fusion of our physical, our digital, and our biological identities.
A fusion of our physical, digital, and biological identities. And of course, Biden's on board.
Extensively on the topic that you've asked me to speak to, mastering the Fourth Industrial Revolution.
Now, he actually signed an executive order calling for, this was in September of last year, calling for developing genetic engineering technologies and techniques to be able to write circuitry for cells and predictably program biology in the same way in which we write software and program computers. Now, Klaus Schwab did a book on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. He says your smartphone is going to become part of you. You're going to implant it in your brain. He says governments might start mandating this stuff because, hey, you might be a security risk and we don't know about it. And so here's where Yuval Noah Harari imagines this is going.
We need to reinvent democracy for this new era in which humans are now hackable animals. You know, the whole idea that humans have, you know, they have this soul or spirit and they have free will and nobody knows what's happening inside me. So whatever I choose, whether in the election or whether in the supermarket, this is my free will, that's over.
That's over, okay, you hackable animals. Quit thinking you have a soul or a spirit or free will that you could choose your leaders or what you want at the grocery store. That's over, all right? You're just a hackable animal. Now, one of his cohorts, the transhumanist guru, Kurzweil, Ray Kurzweil, the chief of engineering at Google, he takes it even a step further here.
So does God exist? Well, I would say not yet.
Not yet, all right? We're building him. And here's Yuval Noah Harari on Jesus.
I mean, all this story about Jesus rising from the dead and being the Son of God, this is fake news.
This is fake news, okay? And the trained SEALs at Google just clapped along. Here's what's the real news, according to Harari.
Now humans are developing even bigger powers than ever before. We are really acquiring divine powers of creation and destruction. We are really upgrading humans into gods.
Upgrading humans into gods, right? Literally the oldest lie in the book. If you go back to Genesis chapter 3, what did the serpent say? What did Satan say? Hey, you won't surely die, right? You can have immortal, eternal life. God knows when you eat of it, your eyes will be open and ye shall be as gods, right? That's where they're going, folks. And it's all, of course, part of the New World Order.
And for future
I
generations.
remember this.
A new world order. A world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
And so they all agree with this,
After
right? Bill
1989,
Clinton
President
agrees.
Bush kept said, and it's a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order.
And Biden
The
agrees.
affirmative task we have now is to actually create a new world order.
Yeah, so they all agree,
So
right?
I think
Here's
you
Soros.
need a new world order, that China has to be part of the process of creating it, and they have to buy in. They have to own it the same way as, let's say, the United States owns the Washington Consensus, the current order.
So the most murderous dictatorship in human history has to own the new world order, says the guy who put more money into our political system than anyone else for the last 3 election cycles in a row. David Rockefeller in 1973 said the social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history. That was in the New York Times. Here is Mr. Schwabi.
The Chinese model is certainly a very attractive model for quite a number of countries.
A very attractive model, right? And so, I think there are eschatological implications here. 2,000 years ago, when John wrote that everybody would have to get a mark to be able to buy or sell, that nobody would be able to buy or sell without it. That probably sounded silly, and yet today we see them trying to lay down this infrastructure. But of course, we don't want to be scared, right? God didn't give us a spirit of fear. We know this is a spiritual battle. We're up against powers and principalities, the rulers of the darkness of this world, spiritual wickedness in high places. We know that our offensive weapon is the sword of the Spirit. That is, of course, the Word of God, the Bible. And so in practical terms right now, how do we resist this? Well, for one, stop using cash as much as you can. Cut up your cards if you can. Refuse to do business with businesses that won't take cash. Support local businesses. Get access to good information, folks. I'm senior editor at the New American Magazine. I put out a weekly or a bi-weekly newsletter through Liberty Sentinel. Go to libertysentinel.org. Sign up. It's absolutely free. I've got a book on the deep state you can grab if you want to know who these people are. I encourage you, as much as possible, stop using the big tech companies, especially Google. They're so evil. Now, South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem actually vetoed the legislature's effort to enshrine CBDCs in there. She said in her letter, her statement about this, that it would be imprudent to create regulations on something that doesn't exist. She also said, even more importantly, South Dakota should not open the door to potential future overreach by the federal government. Now, here in Florida, we have actually banned CBDCs in law, passed overwhelmingly bipartisan in the House and Senate. And it says the acceptance of such a currency by the state is prohibited. DeSantis attacked it. The CFO of Florida, Petronas, attacked these CBDCs. Now there are federal efforts to ban it. Some of the good news is when Americans hear about this, they are absolutely horrified. Only 16% actually support this, while 74% are opposed. Here's a big problem, though. Only 72% of Americans have not even heard of CBDCs, according to a recent scientific poll commissioned by the Cato Institute. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us to stop this, folks. We need states to stop treating gold and silver like taxable commodities. We need them to start treating it as money. That's what the Constitution requires. And so we need to repeal, for example, capital gains taxes on gold and silver. In Texas, they're way ahead of us. They have a Texas Gold Depository, and they're actually now working to create a system where you as a Texan would be able to go out and buy and sell using gold on deposit at the Texas Bullion Depository, all backed by the state. Ultimately, I think we need to fight the Great Commission or the Great Reset with the Great Commission. We need to make disciples of all nations. We need to share the word of God with them. We need to baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And we need to teach them to obey all the things that God has commanded us. I know this giant in front of us looks very intimidating. He's enormous. He's powerful. He's got money. He's got media. He's got the governments of the world, the central banks. But guess what? Goliath was a powerful giant as well. And we all know how that story ended. He got his head lopped off by little David, right? The little boy with faith. And folks, be encouraged. We know how this ends. Every knee is going to bow. Every tongue is going to confess. These evildoers are going down. But in the meantime, we have got to do everything we can to stop them. So that's all we have time for today, folks. But I want to thank you so much for watching. Thanks again. And you can, again, find me at my website, libertysentinel.org. Thanks again, and God bless you all.